And I'd just like to start by introducing our two speakers this evening. So Ian Wright. Ian has taught cranial and paediatric osteopathy internationally for over 25 years. He's a teacher and fellow of the Sutherland Cranial College in the UK. He practices in Florence, London and Ireland. And his book, Dynamics of Stillness, was released last October. Mary Bolingbroke started teaching at the BSO back in 1993. She set up a multidisciplinary clinic at the Osteopathic Centre for Children in London. She's a faculty member of the Dynamics of Osteopathy and teaches on biobasics courses. Mary and Ian trained together at the BSO, from which they both graduated in 1992. And together they co-founded the Irish Diploma in Paediatrics. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce, first of all, Ian Wright.
Hi everybody. So we're just going to start, I think, by having a little still point. So what we really want to do is arrive. So wherever you are, just try to find a little bit of comfort in your seat and relax your body a little bit. And what we're trying to do is get a sense of where we are in space. And what we're doing is, when we're living our normal days, we're leaving our energy in all sorts of different places. So if we're thinking about the food we've just been cooking, the work we're doing, we're worrying about this, parts of our energy are in different places. And if we start to acknowledge where those different parts of us are, get a sense of where we are and where we sit in a 3D space, and settle into our bodies, and just allow those kind of packets of energy to come in, to resettle into ourselves. And in that process, we can allow any thoughts, feelings, emotions, whatever to come. We don't judge, we just sit with ourselves here. And the reason why we're doing this is we need to find where we are in space before we start any kind of work. So just sit for a second comfortably and quietly in yourself. And just start to get a sense of something quiet, something still, that is behind all the sound. So behind all the noise, there is stillness. And as we start to get a feeling sense of that stillness, which is in us, but all around us, the great natural peace that's everywhere, what I'm trying to highlight here is, what are we feeling this stillness in? How are we feeling that? This is something that I think is called the felt sense. This feeling sense is, we're not hearing stillness. Stillness has sound, doesn't it? But it has quietness to it. It has power, but we can't see it. We can feel it. How do we feel it? We feel it with every cell in our body. Okay? So just let's enjoy that feeling of stillness for a second. Okay. So in this work, when I'm teaching this, I always start with this idea of fulcrums. The fulcrums are the start point. Fulcrums are, in a way, they're things that take us away from our sense, our center. They take us away from our midline. You can't treat a patient unless they're in their body. Literally, they have to be in their body for you to start. And when we're working with this work, one of the first and lovely things to do is to get a sense of where this patient is. For example, if someone is emotionally upset, they can be beside themselves, but they literally can feel like they're beside themselves. If they've had any trauma, shock, grief, emotions, illnesses, accidents, operations, they can take parts of their energy into different places. And if we can acknowledge that and allow them to return to their bodies, it's the beginning of a much deeper process of treatment. So, for example, with an autistic child, the very first thing I always try and do is allow this child to come back into their body. But the problem is, when I was first working nearly 30 years ago, I would put these autistic kids back into their bodies, and it was incredibly shocking and difficult for them, and they would tend to react very strongly to that. But now we do it slowly because there tends to be a lot of shock. But actually, as soon as a child comes into their body, their eyes engage, they contact, they find you. So just going to introduce a few ideas here about a little bit linked to what we're going to be doing on our course, and a little bit of the history and a few kind of concepts of how this field is going, this cranial work is going. So it started, obviously, as we know, with William Garner Sutherland, who was in the office of Andrew Taylor Still, and he was looking at a disarticulated skull and looking at the temporal bones, and they look like gills. And he thought these must have some kind of ability to breathe, some kind of movement to breathe. And from this, he started to experiment, and he put rubber bands on his head and blocked certain parts of movement, allowed others, caused himself all sorts of problems, and his wife, I think. But from that, he perceived like a biomechanical model almost of how the structural sutural changes in the cranial bones function, and how the sacrum moves, and how the dural membrane moves, and how the central nervous system moves, and how the central cerebrospinal fluid fluctuates. So this biomechanical method of looking at it was a start point. I remember when I was first teaching on a 5-day postgraduate course with a teacher called Dr. Edna Lay, who was one of Sutherland's students. Because I was so young and I was on the course, and it was my first teaching, she helped me teach how to teach, and it was wonderful. And when she did a CV4 with somebody, she applied a great deal of strength. She held this occiput very, very strongly, stopping the inhalation phase movement. And because it was such a strong kind of grip, and she said, it's not done if they don't sweat at the end, and you haven't taken 8 minutes. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Interestingly, as Sutherland went through, and he started kind of slightly later in his life, into the 1930s, late 1930s, he started to change his terminology. He started to look at things like liquid light, potency, tide, breath of life. All those kind of concepts started to come in. When Mary and I first qualified, we worked together on patients, and that's how we learned. And it was a wonderful experience, actually, to share patients. And what we did is we had one person had their hands on the feet, one person had their hands on the head, and we watched this, what I would call probably potency, unraveling the lesion patterns. And we just sat there and watched, and we learned how to do it like that. That was very different model to what we'd learned in terms of a biomechanical model. And I'm just going to explore some of those ideas as well, what all that is about. And just as an aside, we work together in the Daisy Clinic in Ireland, and it's a wonderful experience. Learning together as a group is an incredibly warm, sharing experience, and everybody is learning, everybody grows, and that's the wonderful thing about group work. And it's something that, of course, we miss doing right now at the moment. My first day at work when I qualified, and I was a young 22-year-old, I'm just qualified from the British School of Osteopathy. And my first patient, I drove down to a practice in Tunbridge Wells called Stillness Courses, and my 8:30 patient I was late for, I rushed into the room, and there was a child in an acute asthma attack and in distress. And I had no idea what I was doing. The principal came in, Stuart Call, he came in and he said to me, "Oh, just give the child a CV4." I had no idea what a CV4 was. So I put my hands on the child and kind of waited a little bit and starting to panic a little bit. Anyway, 5 minutes later, he came back in and did some wonderful kind of thing as he does. And the child threw up and started breathing normally. And I thought, wow, I've arrived. This is amazing. This is osteopathy that I've not seen before. And what it made me think at the time, and what I've been working for since that time, probably 28 years ago, is the incredible potential of what we do. And it's interesting, the relevance of that right now is that in 1919, especially in the States, with the Spanish flu and the consequent pneumonias from it, osteopaths were practicing all the time. There's a huge amount of research about osteopathy working at that time, and osteopaths working night and day on these patients, and with incredible result, because this was pre-antibiotic time. So when this whole situation started, I was desperate to try and get into the hospitals and try and help in whatever way I can. And when I arrived here in Florence, I was like, right, I need to get to the hospital. And my wife quickly told me to shut up and stay here and get into quarantine. So I didn't do that. The point that I'm making, though, is the old original osteopaths who used to work in hospitals in America would know how to feel certain disorders, certain problems. For example, they could feel someone who had hypoglycemia, hypertension, sarcoidosis, grief. And they had wonderful palpatory skills, which have been lost along the way, and they're starting to come back a little bit, you know, with our work. But what are they feeling? What were these osteopaths feeling at the time that could allow them to diagnose very clearly, without doing blood tests, this, that, and the other, very specifically what was going on with the patients? Now, when you break it down, we're starting to look at fluid fields, and this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. And these fields, these fluid fields, have a certain texture, tone, quality. So they have a feeling sense, and that texture, tone, and quality is different for every situation. For example, a virus or a bacteria or a parasite or someone who's in an autoimmune inflammatory reaction has a different quality. And it's very nice to just to learn to build up a sensory awareness of how these feel in their fluid fields. And that's something that we'll teach and explore more on the course. So osteopathy has moved on and embraced more models. For example, the works of Jim Jealous with an understanding of the embryologist Eric Bletschmidt, who was looking at biodynamic embryology as this idea of the conceptus, the fertilized ovum, being a totipotent whole. This whole is this wholeness which has an ability to express all of the future functions. And looking at these fluid fields and these embryonic formative fields and trying to trace and feel the remnants of those fields is a very different way of looking at the way the body is functioning and it can open up how we function. And it starts to connect more with what Sutherland was talking about in terms of potency, tide, and expression. But when we're feeling this motion, this breathing motion in the body, what are we actually feeling? What is that? This kind of rhythmic pulsation, does that come from the intra and transcellular fluctuations of metabolic metabolites or waste products as they move in and out of the cells and set up a gradient of fluid, this kind of functional fluid. So this happens on a cellular level, it happens between the cells, and it happens within a structure and an organ. Is that what we're feeling? Possibly, possibly. But we're also feeling lots of other fields. We can feel a great deal of amount of different fields when we're working. And this is where it becomes very interesting because, for example, you can feel relational fields. How does this person or this body relate to other people or place around them? And there is an interrelationship, and you start to feel these interrelationships, and even ancestral fields or genetic fields that are affecting the body. So you've got this totipotent whole, this wholeness, which is expressing itself with life, connected to the tide. But then you have these fields that can interrelate and have an effect, good or bad. And then we start to build up a picture of how this body is working. So Rupert Sheldrake would talk about the idea of a collective memory, a formative field, which created form from a cultural memory. For example, how does an egg become a chicken? It's actually not that easy. And he postulated the idea of this collective memory of chicken, collective memory of egg. And it links up really with this nice idea of the perfect blueprint, which is expressing itself, and the field creates the form. And when we're starting to look at how these fields function and how they interrelate, it opens up another world for us. So you could say that there are vibrating electromagnetic fields that integrate all living systems. For example, from even cells to whole galaxies. The physicist David Bohm talks about a wholeness unfolding and enfolding. So time and space aren't separate. But this is a field which is folding and unfolding. Does that ring a bell? So there are other things in physics that we could look at. The idea that we've been exploring recently is this whole idea is it quantum coherence or quantum entanglement? How can you be so precise or effective in distance healing when you're miles away from someone? You know, Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. How particles can affect each other on different sides of the world. Where is space and time in that? Interesting. So on the course, we'll explore also the idea of ignition and how that relates to light, photons. So how the eyes, the blood, the pineal gland, the third ventricle, the central nervous system respond to photons, light, or how cells can produce rhythmic bursts of biophotons, and the importance of light in neurotransmitters and cellular and connective tissue communication, and how ignition is very important. This ignition, which is the spark, the brightness in the eyes, is very important in treating autoimmune conditions, depression, etc. So the course is entitled Precision in Wholeness. So we're going to use specific areas of the brain body as examples. For example, the amygdala in chronic anxiety. So how does a chronically facilitated amygdala feel? How does that feel? And how can we remember that in someone else who has a tendency to anxiety? But more importantly, how can we act to downregulate that activity? Or how do we look at the blood supply to the hippocampus or the anterior temporal lobe of the brain as a prelude to looking at tendency to cognitive decline. How do we learn to see it and recognize it and hopefully have some kind of effect? Also, we'll look at these functional fields, these physiological fields of function, how physiological systems interrelate and balance, and how we can bring balance to them. How the remnant embryological fields are expressing themselves within the whole. How are the relational fields, the emotional fields, the ancestral fields affecting this wholeness? And the point of it is to develop this felt sense, not this palpation. This is beyond palpation because we're sensing, and we're sensing through stillness, through silence, to allow true health to express itself and unfold within the whole in support of dynamic stillness or the tide. So this is just a brief introduction. There's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of modeling here that we can talk about, the idea of new models of what we do and how it can open the world up for us. I'm going to give a couple more webinars in the near future on them just to take this a little further, and then I'm going to talk about one on treating premature babies, babies, and the wonderful world that is. And you can find that information about that on my Dynamics of Stillness Facebook page. But what we're looking at here is potential, unfolding potential. There's an interesting piece of research actually that came out November the 1st, 2019 in Science magazine. Check it out, it's really interesting. There's some researchers called Fultz, F-U-L-T-Z, et al. And they talk about, they come from Boston University, and they talk in Science magazine about two things: how in shortwave sleep, there is a prevalence of slow delta waves, and how these delta waves create a flow reversal in the cerebrospinal fluid. So the CSF flows from the subarachnoid space into the third and fourth ventricles. It's very interesting, isn't it? What does that seem like? Maybe that's a CV4. So they also talk about this idea called Limp Theory. Again, in this delta wave, shortwave sleep, there is this rhythmic pulse of the cerebrospinal fluid in pathways and arteries around. The pathways are actually around arterioles in the brain. And they've picked up this rhythmic pulse. Now, is this engaging with what we're doing? Are we having an effect working this way? Could that be something that we could look at within our work? There's a lot of questions. And what's wonderful is to be able to be in a group and explore together a sensory experience. So we open part of what I teach. I spend a lot of time teaching Dynamics of Stillness courses where we're opening our senses. We're learning to engage with nature more deeply. We're learning to find stillness in ourselves and come from that place to engage. So I teach these courses to people who aren't healthcare practitioners at all. They're people from all walks of lives. And it's wonderful to actually allow our senses to reopen again, because they're so overwhelmed, shut down, and disconnected, that if we can actually almost allow a detox of our senses so they open out to the world again, we can start to feel tiny details. And we have this great gift in what we do, that we can spend time exploring the natural world in our patients. And that's the great gift of what we're doing in our cranial work. Now, I'm going to leave you with Mary and let her take you on a wonderful exploration through the senses to explore some of this. Mary. Oh, there's the birds.
Thank you, Ian. That was lovely. It was lovely to see you and hear you. Here I am in my garden in Wiltshire, sitting in the natural world, and what I'm going to talk about leads on from where Ian has just left off, because he's been talking about unfolding wholeness, and he's been talking about collective memory that Rupert Sheldrake was talking about. You know, how does a chicken remember how does an egg remember to turn into a chicken, or indeed a chicken into an egg? Anyway, so what I want to do is look at that a little bit more closely, and the way we're going to do it is by considering matter and mind, which is a little bit like chickens and eggs, actually. 150 years ago, Dr. Taylor Still, as Ian mentioned, the founding father of osteopathy, said, "It may be possible that we do not think often enough of man's dual nature, of his body and his mind, and that his body is under his mind and obeys its orders all the time." He understood the power of the mind and that it should never be underestimated, that it influenced the anatomy and physiology of his patients. He taught his students, what you say to your patients is weighty, far beyond your concept. Should you find any hope for his recovery and make that your report, like a thrill of lightning dipped in the sea of love, his vitality dances with joy. But if you should be indiscreet enough in your report to remove every ray of hope, you have chilled the vital energy, you have silenced it. More patients suffer and die from such imprudence and fright than the world has ever dreamed of. So he really, really understood the power of the mind, the power of that sensing that Ian was talking about. More recently, Dr. David Hamilton, who's a research scientist, was working for AstraZeneca, the large pharmaceutical company, and he was doing double-blind drug trials, and he repeatedly saw how effective the placebo treatment was in comparison to the active drug that was being trialed. So he began to research at what level in the body's biochemistry the therapeutic effect of the placebo was occurring. And it turned out that the patient's thoughts were affecting subatomic space. Just as Still had predicted, patients changed their minds about their health and consequently changed their bodies. Dr. Hamilton said, not surprisingly said, going into the subatomic level changes the way you see. There is no structure anymore. Instead, there's empty space permeated by fluid-like waves of energy. And these waves of energy are impermanent, dynamic, and easily changed. And Dr. Still, before any exploration of subatomic space had been made, said, life with a capital L, life is the substance that fills all the space of the whole universe. Now, I don't know if any of you listened to Nick Handel's webinar last week, but he was talking about Still and how Still often used several different words for one thing. And when Dr. Still used the word life, he also meant health, which he had with a capital H, and he often meant love. So We're looking at waves of energy. There's no matter, there's just this space filled with life. And in a moment, we're going to explore the feeling of that space and the inherent unfolding of wholeness that Ian was just talking about. And we're going to do that by going on a guided meditation into our body, into our cells, through the doorway of our own DNA and into that subatomic field. And there we're going to sense those fluid-like waves described by Dr. Hamilton. And we're going to change them. But to do this, it will require quite a change of perspective. We're going to have to soften our minds and think differently, because we're going to be seeing ourselves becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, whilst the structures around us get larger and larger. And so large, in fact, that we're going to be able to enter into them and walk around their cavernous wholeness. And you might be asking yourself, well, why would we want to do that? And there are several reasons why we're going to do that. Partly because the course that we're teaching is about specificity in wholeness, and you can't get more specific than an atom, and you can't get more wholeness than the whole of space. And because we want to explore our relationship with space, because space, or life, as Still said, is continuous, and it's shared between all of us, and consequently it's the perfect expression of oneness and wholeness. And that brings us to something that Ian just mentioned, the blueprint, the perfect blueprint of health. Because wouldn't it be lovely if we could explore our perfect blueprint of health, upon which is written this current working physical body that we live in? Finally, we want to go on this exploration because we want to explore changing our physical body by changing our mind. Is it possible to get closer to our perfect blueprint by changing the way we think? So before we do any of that, we're going to start by softening our minds a little bit. And let's start by remembering that we're actually two beings. Now, Ian was talking about all the different aspects of our beings, the anxious part, the part with the virus, the part who had an accident 5 years ago and remnants of our tissue memory are still tied up with that. We're all those things, but we're also two very distinct beings. We're a light body wrapped up in a flesh body. So in cranial terms, our light body could be seen as that inner embryo, that perfect blueprint of health. Sometimes we see that light body as light. We see flickers of it in people when we're treating them, and people, it looks like a liquid light. And sometimes you see people who are really expressing their light body and they're radiant. They might have just fallen in love. Sometimes it's not even necessarily that they're healthy in the terms that you might normally use the word health. I've used to work in a hospice. So these people are not, as you would normally call healthy, they're dying, but often the health with a capital H, the lifefulness and the radiance that shone out of their faces is that light body. So we're our light body and we're also our flesh body. And our flesh body, as opposed to the light body, is made of food. It's prone to decay and death. And whilst it's quite good fun, whilst it lasts, it does have a definite sell-by date. Our light body, on the other hand, is eternal and divine. So we're a light body wrapped up in food that's become flesh, and DNA could be seen as the link between the two, because DNA exists in this temporal flesh body, but it also connects us through time and space, right back to our ancient ancestry and forward into our future generations. So whilst our flesh bodies come and go, the DNA remains the same. And let's remember some really interesting things about DNA. It's found in the nucleus of every cell except red blood cells. And if it were unraveled from its double helix pattern, each cell would contain a DNA thread 2 yards long, but just 10 atoms wide. So there are 125 billion miles of DNA in each of us, which is enough to wrap round the earth 5 million times. But the enzymes that repair the double helix and correct any errors in the replication process only make one mistake every 10 billion letters, meaning that DNA is very, very stable. It's been in existence since life began, and it has changed less than the rock formations created at the same time. Many of those rock formations obviously have already crumbled into the sea, as the song goes, but the DNA remains the same. Having said that, although DNA only makes up we've got the DNA thread, and remember it's made up of genes. So the genes make up 3% of that entire thread. Of course, hilariously, some of the other parts of the thread are called junk DNA. What that means is scientists haven't worked out what it does yet. It doesn't mean it's junk. Anyway, I digress. There are 3% of the entire thread made of genes that regulate aspects of our health, our longevity, and heritability. Now, recent research has indicated that it's possible to change the expression of 70% of these mark genes, which is where we will be coming in, and probably where a lot of our therapeutic treatments come in. Now, we've just thought about DNA. Now what we're going to do is we're going to consider space. As we've said, space is full of life, and we are life. So let's consider space, because we are, wait for it, and don't start writing this down, we are 99.9999999999999. Good thing I wasn't dialing the ambulance, isn't it? Anyway, that's 99 point with 15 nines % space. So we think that we're made up of matter, don't we? You know, we feel our flesh body, and it certainly feels like matter. But we know that if we look at it through a very powerful microscope, we'd see that we are made up of billions and billions of atoms. So let's consider, what does an atom look like? Well, it's got protons and neutrons in the middle, and then in its orbit there are electrons. So you might have a picture of that in your mind, but no picture is ever drawn to scale, because you can't draw it to scale, because you would never have a piece of paper big enough. If a central proton was the size of a grape, the nearest electron would be the size of a speck of dust 2 miles away. So imagine if you could tether that speck of electron dust to one of those 2-mile-long gossamer threads of DNA, and you stood on your proton grape and you had your speck of electron dust 2 miles away, and you span it right around your head with a 4-mile diameter. That is the ratio of matter to space that we're looking at. And within that space, remember, by the time you've got there, matter isn't even a structure anymore. It's become fluid-like waves of energy, the very energy that's still called life. So we're going to go on a journey into the atomic particles, out of our flesh body, through a portal into the fluid energy of the light body. And we're going to use our right brain to do it. Now, when I say our right brain, obviously I'm not saying that we've got a right brain and a wrong brain. We're going to be using the brain up the hemisphere on the right side of our head. And why are we going to do that? We're going to do that because they are very different. We tend to use our left brain much, much, much more than our right brain, especially in this current society. That's because our left brain is analytical, it's temporal, it's critical, it's inquiring, it's scientific, and it's also judgmental, which is great for a lot of things, but it's not great for this. Our left brain is more aligned with our ego and with our flesh body. It's more concerned with the past and the future. And if we go into this fluid energy space using our left brain, it will try to solidify and judge and rationalize what we see. So instead, we're going to use our right brain, which is quite different. It's artistic, it's creative, it's holographic. It sees time differently. It sees time as now. Our left brain sees time in a very linear way. Our right brain sees now, meaning it witnesses rather than judges. It's present. It observes. Now, you've probably all done a lot of judgmental left brain work recently, and frankly, who hasn't over these last few corona weeks? Whilst we've been watching all these broadcasters sitting in their kitchens and offices and hallways, who hasn't, and I have, who hasn't looked over their shoulder and thought, oh my, he's got untidy bookshelves? Or watching Have I Got News for You? Wow, those curtains. Oh, that's a dull painting. Anyway, so that's our left brain, very judgmental, usually judgmental, which is one of the reasons why we're going on this exploration through anatomy. But no, not a single slide of a cell membrane or an organelle or a DNA spiral. And that's because I don't want your left brain to get an image of how it thinks things should look, and then try to make your experience fit those pictures. Now, I am not saying that on the course Ian and I will be teaching, we won't be using very detailed anatomical pictures and drawings and diagrams. We will, because there is a real place for specificity. But it's not here, it's not on this journey. So, as an experiment, just as you're sitting there, feel the sensation of your tongue on your teeth. And you can feel your teeth right now. And you get incredible sensations. You can't see it, but you can really feel it. Now, how would that have been helped if I had had a picture of dentition? It wouldn't. It might have even made it harder, because you would have tried to fit what you feel to the picture. So a diagram is for the left-brained intellect. And we're going to be using our right brain. We're going to trust that what we see in our body is perfectly right, because it is. It will be perfectly right. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to see something that looks anatomically perfect compared to the pictures. You're not going into a journey into Grey's Anatomy. This is sensation. This is what Ian was talking about. This is beyond palpation. This is of the whole other realm that we're going to be exploring. Sorry, I seem to have got a feather attached to my glasses. Oh, that's better. What you might find on this journey is, when we get to DNA, for example, maybe it will look like a double helix spiral to you, just as you've seen in the pictures. Maybe it'll look like a plate of cooked spaghetti. Maybe it won't look like anything at all. Maybe you'll just feel it. And we need to open our minds to accept that whatever it perceives, that it witnesses, it's right. Because we know ourselves intimately. And we go into this knowing that we can't be wrong. There's no judgment. So, before we set off, let's practice tuning in our right brain. So, sit comfortably. You've just done this with Ian, and we're just going to catch up from where Ian left off. Sit comfortably and become fully aware of yourself in your surroundings. By doing that, you've automatically tuned into now, this minute. You're already away from your left brain and into your right brain. Now, from where you're sitting, imagine going into a very familiar room in your house. You may well be sitting in your house right now, but don't choose that room. Choose your bedroom or your kitchen, one of the rooms that you're not in. Imagine yourself standing in that room. Your feet are on the floor and you look down and you can see exactly what the floor covering is. And then look up at the wall in front of you. What can you see? Very slowly, look round to your right. Look at the wall ahead of you. What shelves there are. Mirrors. Is there a window? And keep moving around towards your right until you come to the next wall. And then you look at that and you observe it and witness it. And your gaze just moves across it. And there's the next wall. And whatever is there, you know. And here we are, back to where you started. Look down again at your feet. And now come back to here. Come back to sitting in your body. And what you've done is you've witnessed somewhere that you knew well, with no judgment, and you've witnessed it in effect, in real time. Now that you're back, look at some object, maybe your sleeve or my glasses, or I've got a little clock here. Look at these things and maybe even hold it in your hand and just get a sense that maybe it's not quite so solid as you at first imagined. And then perhaps get a sense that neither of these things are as solid. And not only that, but they're not discrete objects. They're related. They're connected by the continuous spaciousness of life that fills wholeness. They're both supported and imbued with space. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've engaged our observer mind, our right brain, and we're in the present moment. So let's begin. So check that you're sitting comfortably. Take a lovely, soft, deep, comfortable breath. Feel your pelvis on the chair and feel your feet on the floor. And now feel your feet getting rooted and connected into the earth below you. And with a lovely deep breath, deepen those roots. Really let them connect into the earth. And then you'll feel the earth connecting with you. And now let those roots connect. We're all connected. Just like tree roots that tangle up with each other a little bit. Can you feel just a slight tingle in the touch of your roots with other roots? There, and just take another deep, comfortable breath. Beautifully connected in earth. And feel your body in three-dimensional space around you. You're in the space, complete and whole. In your mind and in my mind, let's just consider our friends and colleagues and everyone who's listening to this meditation right now. We're like one, aren't we? We're all doing this together. We're all rooted in the same earth. We're breathing the same air. We're made of the same water. And we're all about to enter the same subatomic space, perfused by the same breath of life. So take another breath and bring your attention to the part of your body that you'd like to work with. You already know which part that is. Somehow you had already chosen. Put your hand on it for a moment if you can, and remember that this part that you've chosen might not be somewhere that you can put your hand. It might be your foot, or you could put your hand on your foot if you wanted. It might be your spine. It might be a part of your head. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter which part it is. But the part that you are drawn to. So just connect there for a moment. And begin to feel yourself getting smaller and smaller and smaller until you can gently, fluidly, softly enter into your body. Now you're inside your body and you're going to get smaller until you can enter in to that organ. You slide through the membrane if it has a membrane, or glide through the periosteum if it's a bone, or the pericardium if you're into your heart. What does it feel like in there? Are there colours, or sounds, or feelings? Is it roomy or cramped? Look around the space, just as you did when you looked around your room. This is your body, and you know it well. Okay, now you're starting to get smaller again. You're shrinking down and down and down. Smaller and smaller and smaller. And those structures around you are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The vessels, the muscle fibers, the nerves, the fascial sheets, they're expanding and expanding and expanding, and you're getting smaller and smaller and smaller until those structures have disappeared and you're amongst the cells. There they are, cells. How big are they at the minute? The size of a football? A space hopper? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what do they look like? Maybe huge transparent balloons. Whatever they look like, you can walk around them, you can go behind them, you can look into them, you can really get to know them. And then you're shrinking again, smaller and smaller and smaller. And the membrane of the cell is possible to slide through. You can just slip in, and there you are, inside the cell. And it's as large as a room. And in front of you, there are all those organelles. There's mitochondrial powerhouses, there's lysosomes doing the tidying up and clearing away debris, there's proteins being made by ribosomes in one place. You can see all of it stretching out before you, and you can feel them busy at work. But there's a larger organelle. It's the nucleus. You glide towards it because you're getting smaller, and the nucleus is getting bigger and bigger, and it's vast. You come up to it and you see that there's a pore, and that there's 2 layers to this membrane, but the pore will let you go straight through. And there you are, inside. What can you see? You're in the nucleus. What can you see? Well, there's on the floor, there's chromatin fibers, and that's where the DNA is. So you glide towards it, and there's the DNA. What does it feel like? Is it bright? Is it shiny? Is it colourful? Is it working? Does it flash and shine or coil? As you watch it, and as you climb, find yourself inside it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there you are, inside the thread. You're in a field of atomic particles. You can glide amongst them. You can hear them working. How extraordinary. But you're getting smaller again, and the space around you has expanded. And you've slipped through the portal of your flesh body. You're surrounded by vast space, suspended in it. There's distant stars, twinkling lights, and space above you, behind you, below you. A vast, vast space. And yet, you're not lonely, you're not afraid. This space knows you. It's life. And you know it. You perceive in this space lights like stars, and you can see one larger, brighter star. And in this realm, you are a co-creator, and that star is the one that you're going to be working with. You can change its influence upon you as easily as you can change your mind. This is going back to source. You change at source. As you look at that star, you see it gently falling, dropping down into the center of the field. And as it does so, it sends out beautiful, watery, white light with a rather extraordinary sound. Life must be. That's very unusual to have a motorbike in this three-dimensional field. As that wave, that tide comes towards you, how does it feel? Let it wash through you. Now look again. And we're going to watch the second star drop. But this one is going to reveal to you the discomfort or the illness or the pain or the anxiety that you felt in that part of your body. Ask the star to show you the wave of that. As the star drops, is the tide. There's no judgment. It just ripples towards you across this three-dimensional pool. And now, if you want to, ask those waves to change. As simply as that. If you want to replace those waves with waves of health, say so. Be clear and concise and cancel those waves, allowing them to dissipate and disappear. And let's replace them. Let's replace those waves with the waves of energy from the blueprint of perfect health. Look up at that star, and as it drops down, a tide, a wave of great beauty flows and surges towards your light body that is the essence of you. Your blueprint for health flows into you, through you, washing you and loving you. And you can always come back here. You can always come back to this space because it exists always within you. And those waves of great beauty from your blueprint are always available. So it's time for us to leave this space now. But you'll always be able to come back here because you've been here. You've experienced it, and you know the way back. And the natural world will bring you back here whenever you want. You never really leave. You can always come back. So you can start to feel yourself getting bigger. Those atoms are reforming around you, coming closer and closer, and you find yourself in that DNA thread. Does it look different now? Maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. But just compare it to how you perceived it on your way in. You're starting to get a bit bigger now. So you step backwards out of the DNA thread, and there you are in the nucleus, in the cell nucleus. But it's getting smaller and smaller, and you're getting bigger, and you don't want to get squashed. So you gently step backwards through that double layered membrane, through that little pore, and you close it carefully behind you. And there you are in that cell, and you're stepping back, and there are the organelles again working away. And does the cell look different? Maybe it feels washed and clean. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's changed in another way. But whatever it has done, it's starting to get smaller, and you're getting bigger. So you glide out through the membrane, and you carefully close that behind you. And there you are. You're back in that piece of heart or bone, wherever you went in, and your flesh body is reconstructing itself all around you. And suddenly you're no longer a part of your body, you are your body, and you're sitting on a chair, your feet are rooted to the earth, and you're grounded again. And take a lovely deep breath. And here we are, back, sitting in our three-dimensional space, in our three-dimensional body, in our flesh body, but knowing that we contain that light body that's just been held in life, held in love, held in health. And do you remember what Still said about giving his patient a good report of his health? Because his patient's mind would control his body. And do you remember he said, a good report would be like lightning gently touching down into the sea of love. Well, doesn't that just sound exactly like what we've done? Wasn't that like an ignition right out in zone D, as Jim Jealous would call it, creating that ignition deep in our central stillness, which sometimes we might call our midline, although we try and avoid that term now. Ian and I had a long conversation about that. It's not a line and it's not in the middle, but what it does do is connect the zone D beyond the horizon with the zone D light that Ian was talking about in us. Recall too that space that we've been in and experienced is shared. There's just one space teeming with just one life, and that life perfuses and breathes and lives us all. And remember that we just entered that space consciously connected with our friends and colleagues. Well, actually, not only do they share that space, but all of us do. Everyone is there. And if we bring health and ignition to one of us, we bring it to all of us. The waves that spread out from those falling stars of health with a capital H spread out far further than any of us can ever know. Now, there's just, I think I've got a few minutes more. There's just one more thing that I wanted to say, because I was looking in Jim Jellis's book. It's this one. It's called An Osteopathic Odyssey. And although I've had this book for many, many years, I don't often look in it. Now, the way Jim describes this book as having been written on the tide or by the tide. So he's written a little bit for each day, so you can look up and see what the day is. So I thought, I wonder what Jim actually did write for May the 27th, because that would be interesting to know. So I had a look, and for May the 27th, he said, rest builds a dependency on the tide. Now, he had spoken before about rest on May the 13th, actually. And he said, rest is a retreat into the interior world. It's an opportunity to visit with the health of the truth that lives in us. To be in the moment is to be outside of time, in the moment of creation, love, and eternity. If we bring the senses into the present moment, very beautiful and interesting events occur. I think that's it. I think the train going past was the end from me. Unless you want to hear one more thing, Ian, this is for you. This is for your birthday on May the 14th.
15th.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll read what it says on the 15th. Dr. Still wrote inside the cover of his student's book, I love to love, and I love to be loved. Do you?
Beautiful.
Thank you, everyone.
That was beautiful, Mary. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Ian and I?
Yes, there's a few questions have come in, Ian and Mary, if you'd like to, if I read them out for you.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Do you work, this is from Clara out in the US, do you work with children around generational trauma? And if so, how do you do this?
I think we both can answer in different ways, can we?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Ian?
Sure. I mean, I suppose the question with that is if it's relevant, if it presents itself to be relevant, and how one works, I think, with those types of situations it's opening up your sensorium to these fields, and that sometimes there are very strong generational influences that are having a strong influence on the expression of total health within that child. It could be a genetic pattern, or it could be more of a generational emotional thread, and these can go through time, and the effect can be very much in the present. And I suppose what we're always trying to do is to allow our senses to be open to seeing these possible threads, and for me, if you see them and acknowledge them to the health, then the pattern changes. And it's as simple as that, really. So for me, it is important to see them, though. Mary?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think if you're treating children, of course there's a relationship with their parents, their grandparents, as Ian says, genetically, emotionally. If I get, and absolutely, so much of this work is simply about witnessing. When a pattern is witnessed, it can change. Sometimes if I get a sense that a child, or indeed an adult, is being influenced by a particularly strong hereditary ancestral pattern, what one can do is just in your mind go back through generations. So you say, does this pattern arise in the grandparents, in the great-grandparents, in the great-great-grandparents, and go back, and one of them will light up. You'll just light up, and you go, okay, thank you very much. And then I just hold the two, the child and the ancestor, in my mind. And a relationship, as Ian was talking about, is relational. A relationship will develop, and then it will harmonize. If you just witness it, don't try and change it. Don't make anything happen. You don't need to.
We can't change it. Our will can't change a thing. It just causes trouble. Yeah, but acknowledging it to the health, and it's amazing. It just dissolves. It's very easy, these things, once you find them. You know, it's a matter of opening our senses to them, I think. Yeah. Any others?
I hope that's answered your question, Clara.
So, one from an anonymous, actually. Is it important to know what exactly is going on in the patient? Do we do, or are we just present and the body, in fact, does the job from the inside out?
That's a good one, that one. I like that.
It's a perfect question, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, or shall I? Do you want to go first? Okay, I can talk.
But I think it's really important to say that you can't make anything change using this unless the body has already started to respond to the will of the tide.
Exactly. Yeah, that takes your will out of it. That's exactly it. It's an interesting dilemma, because actually, for example, if you take a patient into a state, say, of dynamic stillness, then anatomy dissolves. You can't see anatomy anymore, and it can reform in the moment, but that's a process within it. And so for me, I'll give you a personal response to this. I like to see, I personally think, for example, like we described in the last one, if you see the story and you see the health, then the story can resolve itself. If you can be, for me personally, the more precise I can be, you know, is this whatever, some sort of exact parasite, or is this whatever is going on for them, is this grief, and acknowledge that pattern of grief in someone, albeit even silently, but acknowledging that pattern in a very precise way seems to me to be personally more effective. I mean, another way is, of course, just going purely to the potential for health. And that is a wonderful form of treatment. But me personally, I like precision within that. That's kind of the dilemma that we're having within this course, which is the wholeness. When you see total wholeness, there is no separation. And it's perfect. But what I like doing is watching the wholeness unfold by seeing those things, because it's just my personality. So yes, Mary?
I think that we're two beings, aren't we? We're a flesh body that needs fleshy stuff done to it, and we're a light body that, responds to wholeness, to love, to the tide. But we're both, and you can't only be one or only be the other. So I think that's what's so fantastic about osteopathy, that it encompasses both. It's one of the only therapeutic agencies that I know that acknowledges so truthfully both. It still had the most phenomenal understanding of anatomy. My God, the precision. that he had for each tiny nerve fibre was beyond way beyond my capacity, and yet his huge understanding of love, for example, and the divine. I think we are so blessed to be in such an extraordinary profession where we can use both.
Lovely, thank you. Question here from Marie Claire. Is there any impact of the internet Wi-Fi waves when working this way?
Probably, yeah, but oh my God, I mean, we were just in a soup of stuff. Upsetting.
For years at the practice, I didn't have Wi-Fi. And then I did. I mean, I think you can overcome it very much so working this way. It depends on what you know, you can, I mean, you know, you can distance heal over the Wi-Fi almost, not, you know, it's strange. But I think that we are surrounded by all these electromagnetic waves, and it would be beautiful to be within an unspoiled nature to find that. But actually the reality is we're in the city, we're having to deal with it, and actually we still can be very, I think, just as effective in the city, in the middle of it, as in nature. Nature is much nicer, much easier. It's a lovely way to start, I think, with this work, because nature feeds you and feeds the processes. And the tide, it's so easy to feel the tide in nature, etc., etc. But you can do that in the city, in the middle of it all, you know, as well. Yeah.
So one here from Sarah. Do you both feel the need to be physically with your client, hands-on in your practices, or do you also practice, as we had this evening, by guided visualization and resonance?
Well, since the corona thing, I've been doing a lot of distance work, because when you're in the realm, you're outside of time and space.
Yeah, I mean, yes, my hugely busy practice with hands-on has turned into a really busy practice doing distance healing, not with visualization, with actually using the principles that we do. And I've been astonished at stuff that I've been able to access that hands-on is much harder.
Yeah, me too.
It amazes me. I mean, wow. Yeah.
And in answer to Clara's question about generational stuff, I have found that so much easier to see working with this massive long leverage. I mean, I can't remember who it was. Newton, who said, give me a long enough lever and I'll be able to lift up the earth. There's something about the scope of working distancing like this. Anyway.
So that's Newton and Einstein together there. That's pretty good.
Yeah. I'd like to come, you know,
bring them both in.
Places.
Another question here from Sheila. As you've both been teaching for so long, can you offer any reflections on the nature, composition, intentions, or skills on joining of your student cohorts?
Joining of what, sorry?
Yes, I didn't understand.
Yeah, as you've both been teaching for so long, can you offer any reflections on, I suppose, the differences of students over the years that are now joining the seminars?
Oh, okay. Well, I think that sometimes education can be very limiting, actually. And so sometimes the more educated you are, the less you can actually feel. And sometimes we have to get rid of our education in order to actually let our senses breathe. So for example, when I was teaching certain things like getting on the tide or feeling certain things with people who didn't have a background in osteopathy, say, a lot of them would get it so much easier because we had to de-educate in order to open our senses. So yes, yeah. Mary?
Yes. It's a long time since I've taught any students straight from any of the big colleges, but my feeling is that a lot of them are just qualify, and they're quite anxious. They've been taught so much about you know, the legal things and protecting themselves from being sued, that actually they're frightened, aren't they, to sometimes to really explore. And then if you think, you know, what we've been taught at the BSO, and then what Stuart exposed us to with his practice, we're very, very lucky to, you know, find somebody who was prepared to say, oh, put all that aside and just let's dive in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't, you know, when at college, you wouldn't you'd find it amazing what kind of cases that we see every day. It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, every single person's completely different, and everything, you know, which is just wonderful, you know. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think we've actually come to time now. So I just would like to thank you both so much. That was beautiful. There's loads of messages on the Q&A just saying how fantastic it's been to hear from both of you. They've learned a lot. They've loved the meditations. And so from us, we'd like to really heartfelt thanks to you both for your time.
You're totally welcome.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you here. I'm just going to share a slide here right now to show the up-and-coming seminar that you guys will be running at CTET in October, hopefully, get COVID allowing. For anybody who would like any more information about this seminar, please go to www.cranio.co.uk. And just to wish you all a very good evening. And again, just huge thanks both to Mary and Ian. That was just absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah. And to everybody else, we will be sending out information about our next webinar, which is with Sarah Nesling. And that will be in a couple of weeks' time, so look out for that one. There will be a recording of this one, which will be going on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sending out a link through our Facebook page. If you're not a member on our Facebook page, please do join Craniosacral Therapy Education Trust. Lots of information on there, lots of really good articles and things get posted all the time. And just do stay in touch with us all. We really do enjoy running these webinars for everybody in these times when it's difficult and we're all in lockdown. It's really great to get that sense that we can all really be together. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that actually we've really felt that this evening with both of you through the stilling at the beginning and Mary with yours, that sense of us all really being in this field together. I think that was very palpable this evening. So thanks everybody for your time and for viewing and for staying online. We wish you all a really great evening and we look forward to seeing you again.